My daughter? Absolutely not. My mother's voice echoed through the magnificent ballroom over the microphone, crisp, icy, and sharpened like a blade meant to wound. She's nothing more than a clerk. Every one of the 212 elite guests turned in unison, their conversations dying instantly. My mother stood proudly behind the podium in a custom emerald evening gown, chin raised with practiced superiority, a familiar look of contempt settling across her face as her eyes locked onto mine. I remained at the far end of the grand center aisle, dressed in a simple dark blazer that looked painfully ordinary against the shimmering ocean of designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos surrounding me. Without a trace of hesitation, she flicked 2 fingers toward the private security team. She isn't invited. Escort her out. For security guards immediately broke formation and hurried toward me. At the VIP table, my sister Victoria slowly lifted her crystal champagne flute, a smug smile spreading across her face as though she'd rehearsed this exact moment dozens of times in front of her mirror. She looked delighted. I didn't retreat. I didn't argue. I didn't say a single word. Instead, I calmly slipped my hand inside my blazer, withdrew a solid black military identification card, and pressed it firmly against the chest of the lead guard. The instant he looked down, his expression completely changed. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face as he recognized the Department of Defense clearance stamped across the card. His hand instinctively reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder, desperate to contact his supervisor before making the biggest mistake of his career. But he never had the chance. The massive VIP entrance doors suddenly exploded open. A 4-star general stormed inside with unmistakable urgency, brushing past everyone in his path. He shoved my mother aside so forcefully that she stumbled backward into the podium, nearly losing her balance. The room fell completely silent. The general's eyes found mine immediately. His breathing was heavy. His posture snapped rigid. Then his voice shattered the silence with the force of a rifle blast. Stand down. Every guard froze in place. It's Ghostwalker. Watching every ounce of confidence disappear from my mother's face as a 4-star general raised his hand in salute to the daughter she had just called a clerk was 30 years of pain paying itself back in a single breathtaking moment. If you've ever known the sting of being betrayed by your own family, take a second to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because what happened after that salute didn't just embarrass my mother. It destroyed the carefully crafted empire she'd spent decades building, brick by brick, lie by lie. But none of that happened in a single evening. That confrontation was the final chapter of a story written over 30 long years. 30 years of humiliation. 30 years of rejection. 30 years of invisible wounds layered one over another until the scars became stronger than steel. So let me take you back to the place where it all began. The house where I first discovered that the people who should love you without condition are often the very ones who know exactly how to make you feel invisible. I was only 7 years old when my mother hosted one of her lavish charity luncheons inside the front parlor. 14 wealthy members of the County Arts Council filled our living room, sipping imported tea from her treasured porcelain collection while complimenting the expensive decorations and polished furniture she loved showing off. Victoria stood proudly in the middle of the room, wearing a custom-tailored dress finished with a satin sash wrapped neatly around her waist. That very morning, she'd memorized a Robert Frost poem. Now she recited it flawlessly. The guests applauded politely. My mother practically glowed with pride. She rested one hand proudly on Victoria's shoulder, displaying her eldest daughter the way someone might present a championship trophy. Meanwhile, I stayed hidden at the top of the staircase. My small hands wrapped tightly around the polished wooden banister as I peeked through the narrow railing slats, hoping nobody would notice me. One woman wearing a blue blazer eventually looked up. She smiled kindly. Then she asked my mother about her younger daughter. The room became perfectly still. For exactly 2 seconds. Without even bothering to turn her head, my mother casually waved one hand and answered with a dismissive laugh. Oh, she's slow. She's much better at scrubbing floors than carrying on a conversation. The woman's smile disappeared instantly. She lowered her eyes into her teacup. No one challenged my mother. No one defended me. The silence lingered for only a moment before my mother's polished laugh filled the room again, and the luncheon carried on as though I had never existed. As though I'd already been erased from our family's portrait. I stayed on that staircase another 40 minutes. My fingers became damp against the banister. My legs cramped from crouching. And I listened while the woman I called my mother convinced a room full of strangers that her youngest child was somehow defective. After that day, I learned to make myself smaller, to walk more quietly, to ask for less, to disappear before anyone could tell me to. But there's only so much rejection a child can swallow before something inside finally changes. Eventually, the hurt stops feeling soft. It hardens. It settles deep inside your chest. And it never truly leaves. My father was the only crack in that prison. Robert Harrison had been sick for years. His heart had started failing long before the rest of his body surrendered. He owned a modest engine repair shop at the edge of town, but eventually his hands trembled too violently to hold a wrench for very long. He simply didn't have the strength to fight my mother's relentless need for control. He couldn't outshout her, couldn't overpower her. She understood that. She used his illness like chains around his ankles. But despite everything, he saw me. Every afternoon after school, I'd find him sitting on the weathered back porch behind the garage. The thick Virginia summer air always smelled of rust, grease, and old motor oil baking beneath the afternoon sun. We rarely talked much. He never filled my head with promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he'd quietly place his large, rough hand on top of my head. His thumb would slowly trace gentle circles across my temple. Those silent moments said more than words ever could. Inside the garage, he patiently taught me how to repair broken radios. Even though his hands shook, he guided mine through tangled wires and worn circuits, showing me piece by piece that broken things weren't worthless. Sometimes they simply needed someone willing to fix them. He never actually said that. He didn't have to. His hands spoke louder than any speech. But each passing month stole more of his strength. His breathing became shorter. His coughing echoed through the walls every night. And one question kept growing heavier inside my chest. When he was gone, who would stand between me and her? I received my answer when I turned 16. It wasn't the answer I had prayed for. I was standing in the kitchen wearing an old hand-me-down winter coat that hung nearly 2 sizes too large while my mother organized seating charts for her annual charity gala. Victoria leaned comfortably against the refrigerator dressed in a soft cashmere sweater, adjusting the pearl earrings our mother had proudly rewarded her with after she'd made the honor roll. My mom looked up from the table, her eyes cold and measuring, and pointed at the two of us standing side by side. She told Victoria to move closer, so the comparison was clear, so anyone could see what proper breeding looks like versus what happens when nature disappoints. She looked me dead in the face, her voice flat as a judge reading a sentence, and told me I would never be more than a stain on the Harrison name.
Victoria Smirquez.
My mom went back to her seating chart. I stared at the marble countertop. My fingers pressed flat against the cold surface until the tips turned white and the blood drained from my knuckles. Something in my chest locked shut. Not with a cry, not with a scream, but with a mechanical click. The way a bolt slides forward into a chamber. I did not cry. I did not argue. I burned. And the part of me that once craved her approval turned to ash, right there on that kitchen floor. I never asked for her love again. The day I turned 18, I packed a single duffel bag. My mom sat in the living room scrolling through her tablet, planning another fundraiser. She didn't look up as I walked past. She scoffed at my cheap boots as I reached the front door, muttering under her breath that at least the house would smell better. My dad was waiting by the driveway. He had dragged himself out of bed against the nurse's orders, his breathing ragged, his hands trembling as he gripped the porch railing for balance. He pressed a battered mechanical field watch into my palm. The crystal was scratched deep. The leather strap was cracked and restitched twice with fishing line. He leaned close, his breath thin and warm, and whispered that one day they would all be forced to see me, but I had to survive long enough for that day to come. I strapped the watch to my wrist. I picked up my duffel and walked east toward the Marine recruiting station, 6 blocks away. I did not look back. Behind me, my dad gripped the railing with both hands and watched me disappear down the road. Neither of us knew it would be the last time he ever stood on his own 2 feet. Marine Corps boot camp at Paris Island hit like a freight train and didn't let up for 13 grueling weeks. The screaming drill instructors too in for my face at 4 a.m. The impossible weight of loaded packs cutting welts into my shoulders on forced marches. The miles of running through wet sand until my lungs burned raw, and every breath tasted like copper and salt. I wasn't the tallest recruit in my platoon. I wasn't the heaviest. But I was the one who refused to drop. The first week, a recruit twice my size collapsed during a night march and had to be carried off the course on a stretcher. The second week, 3 more rang the bell and quit. I watched them walk away with their bags, and I felt nothing but cold recognition. Weakness was what my mom expected from me. Weakness was what she had cultivated and watered for 18 years. I would sooner die face down in that sand than prove her right. Every time my legs buckled in the mud, I heard her voice calling me a stain. That insult became fuel pure high octane and unlimited. I ran harder. I hit harder. I crawled lower. I learned to navigate dark rooms without making a sound, executing orders with a precision that made my drill instructors stop screaming and start watching me with narrowed, calculating eyes. They stopped treating me like another body in the formation and started studying me like a weapon they hadn't requisitioned. The graduation ceremony was held on a Friday. Hundreds of new Marines stood at attention on the massive parade deck. Every single one of them had at least one family member in the packed bleachers. Mothers dabbing their eyes, fathers straightening their ties, siblings holding phone cameras high. I scanned the crowded stands. My section was empty. No parents cheering, no coats saving a seat, no flowers waiting to be handed out. Just metal benches and air. My drill instructor, a barrel-chested staff sergeant with 22 years in the Corps, caught me staring at the crowds. He walked over, positioned himself directly in my line of sight, and gave me one firm nod. It wasn't love. It wasn't family. But it was the only acknowledgement in that room that what I had done mattered, and I pinned on my eagle globe and anchor with steady hands. Years ground forward. I earned my degree online between deployments, transitioning from enlisted to officer, and traded my stripes for gold bars. Lieutenant, then captain. I served 3 full combat tours and never mailed a single photo home. On the rare holiday calls, my mom would answer with a theatrical sigh and ask if my typing skills were improving in the military typing pool. I'd look down at my scuffed combat boots, the same boots that had carried me through live fire zones, and calmly say yes. Then I'd hang up and press my forehead against the barracks wall until the burning in my chest settled back down below the surface. I volunteered for the most punishing selection pipeline, the Marine Corps-run Special Operations. The application alone filtered out 90 of candidates. What remained was weeks of forced sleep deprivation, tactical stress inoculations designed by psychologists to trigger panic responses, and physical demands that push the body past the threshold where the mind starts lying to you, telling you to quit, telling you that you've given enough. Candidates hallucinated from exhaustion. Candidates broke bones and kept going until the medics pulled them off the course. Hundreds started, a fraction finished. I was one of them. My service records were immediately sealed behind classified firewalls. My identity was scrubbed from every public database the military maintained. They handed me the solid black identification card and a call sign Ghost Walker. I became a phantom in the system, leading elite operators into active zones that didn't appear on any map and didn't exist in any press briefing. But a classified hero has no leverage in a war against her own bloodline. Not yet. The gap between my 2 lives was a wound that wouldn't close and wouldn't heal. I'd fly back from a deployment still smelling of aviation fuel and gun oil sand still embedded in the lining of my boots. And within hours, my phone would ring. It was always Victoria. She'd spend 20 minutes complaining about the stress of choosing floral arrangements for a corporate luncheon, then condescend to tell me to stay safe at my little desk job. I sat on the edge of my military cot field, stripping my sidearm down to the spring, listening to her whine about orchids versus peas, while my hands moved through the disassembly from muscle memory alone. My squad mates, the men and women who had bled beside me in total darkness, who had carried me when the shrapnel hit and never once asked for a favor in return. They were my real family. The bloodline was a rotting anchor dragging behind a ship that was trying to move forward. I didn't need their validation anymore, but I knew with the trained instinct of someone who reads enemy movement patterns for a living that their greed would eventually cross into my territory and force my hand. 3 years before the gala, on a rain-soaked highway outside of Quantico, I was driving back from a classified briefing. The storm was brutal, visibility down to 20-foot wipers, losing the fight. Headlights swerved violently in the opposite lane. An armored SUV hydroplaned lost traction, slammed through the guardrail, and flipped onto its driver's side with a sound like a building collapsing. I hit my brakes, killed the headlights, and grabbed my trauma kit from behind the seat. The driver was slumped against a deployed airbag, unconscious, and bleeding from the temple. In the crushed rear compartment, an older man in a torn dress uniform was pinned against the buckled door frame. Blood poured from a compound fracture in his left arm. His rank insignia caught the light from my headlamp. 4 stars. I shattered the reinforced glass with my tactical baton, cleared the jagged shards with my forearm, and crawled inside the wreck. I applied a tourniquet above the fracture, locked my forearms under his shoulders to protect his cervical spine, and dragged him through the shattered window frame and onto the wet asphalt. He was fading, his eyes swimming through the blood running down his forehead. He grabbed my wrist, a weak, desperate grip, and in the strobing headlights, he caught only a glimpse of my name taped through the rain. The first 2 letters, Hey AI. I flagged down the approaching paramedics, transferred the patient, and melted back into the storm. A special operator doesn't wait for cameras or press conferences. I washed the blood from my hands with a water bottle in my front seat and drove away in silence. But what I didn't know was that 4-star General James Crawford would spend the next 3 years obsessively searching for the ghost who pulled him from the fire. Just days after saving a man's life without asking for a thing in return, the bitter contrast of my own blood slammed back into focus. My mom called. No. Hello.
No.
Are you safe? She immediately demanded I wire my entire combat hazard pay to cover an unexpected expense for the charity foundation. I knew the expense was fiction. I had seen the pattern for years. She was quietly draining my dad's dwindling medical fund to finance her high society luncheons and impress donors who forgot her name the moment the champagne stopped flowing. When I hesitated, she loaded the guilt into the chamber and fired. She told me I owed her for the roof over my head as a child. She told me that everything I was, every meal I had ever eaten came from her sacrifice. I sat in the dark of my barracks staring at the cold glow of my banking app. I transferred the money, not out of guilt, not love. I transferred it because it was the only way to guarantee my mom wouldn't quietly cancel my dad's nursing care as retaliation. She had done it before, reduced his medication orders the last time I pushed back, and she would do it again without a blink of hesitation. I drained my primary checking account down to the absolute minimum balance. I rubbed my thumb across the cracked face of my dad's watch and repeated his words to myself. Be still and know. Then I closed the banking app, opened the military benefits portal on a second screen, and quietly began setting up a separate savings account in a credit union she would never find. I was paying a financial ransom to keep my father alive. But I swore in the dark of that barracks room that the moment my father was beyond her reach, the bank would permanently close, and the bill would come due. I was halfway across the world on deployment when the encrypted message punched through my secure terminal. 2 sentences from Victoria, stripped of any human warmth. Dad passed. Mom says don't bother coming. Funeral is tomorrow. The callousness hit like a combat knife slit between my ribs. They had known he was declining for weeks. They waited until it was nearly too late to notify me, banking on the distance to keep me from showing up. I marched straight to my commanding officer, requested emergency leave, and boarded a military transport within the hour. 17 hours later, hollow, exhausted, still wearing my dark civilian travel clothes from the transfer, I pulled up to the funeral home in my dad's hometown. I sat in the parking lot for 3 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, running my thumb across his watch face. Then I opened the door, stood up straight, and walked inside. 20 extended family members stopped mid-con conversation and stared. My mom stood beside the open casket, dabbing dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. She looked up, and instead of reaching for her grieving daughter, she let out a loud theatrical sigh loud enough to bounce off the back wall.
Oh.
The clerk found her way back. I thought you were too busy typing memos to care about your own father. She made sure every relative in the room heard it. Victoria stood one step behind her, offering a chilling practice smile. The same smile from the kitchen. The same smile from every moment of my humiliation across 30 years. I walked past both of them without a word. I stood over my dad's casket and looked at his hands. They were folded across his chest, cleaned and posed. But I could still see the calluses, the rough skin, the permanently oil-stained creases of a man who fixed broken things his entire life. I placed my hand on his and made a silent promise. Not a prayer, a mission order. 2 days later, we sat in the mahogany paneled office of the family estate lawyer. My mom was visibly vibrating with eagerness, her fingers tapping the leather armrest, ready to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. Victoria sat beside her, legs crossed, scrolling her phone, already mentally spending the inheritance. The lawyer opened the will. The room froze. My dad had left the house, the land, and every remaining dollar of his savings exclusively to me. But there was a condition written in iron. I had to live in the family house for 6 consecutive months to foster family unity before the assets would legally transfer. If I left before the period ended, everything reverted to the general estate. My mom's face contorted. Her knuckles went bone white on the armrest. Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers and bounced off the carpet. The golden child got nothing. The clerk inherited everything. In the parking lot afterward, my mom cornered me against my rental car. The grieving widow mask dissolved, replaced by bared teeth and raw venom. She promised to make those 6 months a living hell. She swore I would pack my duffel and forfeit the estate before the first month was out. She assumed my silence was submission, the same cowering silence she had trained into me since I was 7. She had absolutely no idea she had just locked a military intelligence officer inside a house filled with her private financial records, her foundation's documents, and 30 years of dirty secrets. I looked her dead in the eyes, adjusted my jacket, and climbed into her car without a single word. The covert operation had officially begun. By the middle of my mandated stay, my mom had escalated her campaign into full psychological warfare. She hosted weekly lavish dinners for her charity donors, banning me from the dining room entirely. Instead, she ordered me to cook, serve, and clean up after them. I stood in that kitchen, hands deep in dishwater, scrubbing her fine porcelain plates, listening through the wall as she told the mayor's wife it was a shame her youngest daughter was such a failure. She painted me as a charity case she graciously housed. I kept my breathing even 4 counts in 4 counts out, channeling the same discipline I used lying motionless for hours in a concealed sniper position overseas. She thought she was breaking me down. She was handing me rope. During one of the dinner parties, Victoria walked into the kitchen to refill her wine glass. She leaned against the counter in a 1000 designer dress, looking down at me in my old t-shirt and rubber gloves, and asked mockingly if my squad mates missed my cooking. She was fishing for a reaction. She wanted me to scream, to slam a plate, to give them documented cause, to say I'd violated the will's behavioral conditions. I didn't flinch. I calmly dried my hands on a towel and looked at her glass. It was shaking. Her pupils were dilated. The golden child was drinking more with every passing week, and the tremor in her manicured fingers wasn't from cold. She was terrified of something buried deep. I stored that observation like a round in a magazine. That night, after the house went dead silent and the last car pulled out of the driveway, I slipped into my dad's old study. My mom had converted it into the foundation's home office filing cabinets, a desktop computer stacks of glossy PR brochures. Using a pen light, I picked the lock on the heavy filing cabinet. Standard pin tumbler took me 11 seconds. I bypassed the public relations folders and dug into the raw bank statements buried behind the tax returns. My eyes trained to spot anomalies in enemy supply chain documents overseas caught the discrepancies within minutes. Invoices from catering companies that had no registered addresses. Six-figure donations quietly funneled through 3 shell accounts into a private offshore holding in the Cayman Islands. Payroll for consultants who had no tax IDs, no social security numbers, no evidence of being real human beings. The charity foundation, the crown jewel of my mom's public image, was a money laundering machine. I pulled the signature page from the largest fraudulent transfer document. The handwriting belonged to Victoria. Every illegal wire, every fake invoice approval bore her initials as legal counsel. My mom was the architect. My sister was the legal shield. I sat in the dark study, the pen light off, listening to the house settle. A cold clarity washed through me like ice water through a pipe. I wasn't a daughter enduring abuse anymore. I was Ghost Walker, and I had just locked onto a pair of high-value targets. I photographed every document front and back, replaced each page to the exact millimeter, locked the cabinet, and slipped back upstairs. The endurance phase was over. Standing in the dark with proof of their federal crimes in my hands, I felt the heavy, suffocating chain of family obligation shatter for good. If you've ever had to silently endure abuse while waiting for the perfect moment to strike back, hit the like button and share your story in the comments. I didn't scream or confront them. I chose a much more destructive path. Over the final weeks of my stay, I lived a strict double life. By day, I swept the floors, scrubbed bathrooms, and absorbed my mom's insults without so much as a change in my breathing. By night, I ran a full-scale forensic audit from my encrypted laptop hidden behind the water heater in the garage, cross-referencing the Foundation's public tax filings with the offshore account numbers I had photographed. I traced the shell companies to P.O. boxes registered in Delaware under fabricated names. Every ghost employee, every inflated invoice, every diverted donation was documented and encrypted onto a single black flash drive. I built a case dossier so airtight no defense attorney on the eastern seaboard could pry it open. My mom grew suspicious of my calm. She started searching my room while I was outside doing yard work. I knew because I placed a single strand of my hair across the zipper of my duffel bag. Basic counter-surveillance. The hair was broken 3 days in a row. She found nothing. Folded clothes and unmade bed. My dad's old watch on the nightstand. The flash drive was taped to the underside of his heavy oak workbench in the garage, the same bench where he once taught me to fix radios with trembling hands. She tore apart my living space, hunting for a weakness, never once thinking, to check the one place in the house that still belonged to him. The morning of the Foundation's massive annual charity gala finally arrived. My mom stood in the hallway wearing a custom-fitted gown, gripping the VIP guest list like a scepter. She looked down her nose at me and told me I was strictly forbidden from attending. She boasted that top military officials, including a 4-star general, would be present to publicly endorse her foundation. She said my presence would contaminate her elite image. I nodded. I kept my face completely blank. My pulse didn't even tick up. She walked out the front door, and I watched her car glide down the driveway with the patience of a hunter watching prey walk into a clearing. The moment her taillights disappeared, I retrieved the flash drive from the workbench. I had securely transmitted the encrypted dossier to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division 2 weeks prior, guaranteeing they had enough time to secure their federal warrants. Tonight was just about lighting the match. I opened my laptop, composed an email to the most aggressive investigative journalist in the Commonwealth, and attached the final puzzle pieces. I set it to delayed send at exactly midnight. Then I closed the laptop, walked to my closet, and bypassed the civilian clothes. I pulled out my sharp dark blazer. I clipped my black Mars identification card into the inner breast pocket. I checked my dad's watch. I wasn't going to the gala to cause a scene. I was going to let the scene make itself. I arrived at the Grand Ballroom at 9:00 p.m. The room rire of expensive cologne and self-congratulation. Crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures melting into silver trays, a 12-piece string ensemble playing something elegant that nobody was listening to. I bypassed the registration desk without stopping and walked straight down the center aisle. My dark blazer cut through the glittering crowd like a blade through silk. Conversations died in my wake, heads turned. My sister spotted me first from across the room. Her champagne smile dropped into a tight, angry scowl. She gripped her glass so hard her knuckles turned white, then tapped my mom's arm urgently. My mom turned from the podium and her face twisted with a fury I had seen 1,000 times. The rage of a woman whose carefully controlled image was being threatened by the one person she had spent 30 years trying to erase. She grabbed the microphone. She called me a clerk. She ordered security to remove me. Four guards moved in from 3 directions. 212 guests held their breath. I pulled the black card, shoved it against the lead guard's chest. He froze, the radio dying in his hand, and then the VIP doors blew open. General James Crawford charged through the crowd like a man who had just seen a ghost because he had. He shoved my mom away from the podium with one arm, sending her stumbling sideways. She grabbed the edge to keep from hitting the floor, her emerald gown catching on the podium step. He stared at me, his chest heaving recognition, flooding his scarred face like a dam breaking. 3 years he had spent hunting for the phantom who pulled him from a burning wreck on a rain-soaked highway outside of Quantico. 3 years of tracking down every service member whose last name started with CH, requesting classified personnel files, calling in favors from Pentagon contacts. And now she was standing 10 feet in front of him in a dark blazer, surrounded by private security guards. Her own mother had ordered to throw her out. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask for confirmation. He turned his imposing frame toward the stunned crowd, every metal on his dress uniform, catching the chandelier light, and pointed a scarred finger directly at me. His voice carried the full authority of a man who had commanded thousands. He announced that I was a United States Marine Corps Special Operations captain operating under a classified call sign. He told the room of politicians, donors, and socialites that 3 years ago on a highway in a rainstorm, he ripped him from a burning vehicle, applied a tourniquet that saved his arm, stabilized his spine, and vanished into the dark without asking for a medal, a commendation, or even a name to send the thank you card to. His voice cracked on that last part. He studied himself and turned to my mom, who was literally trembling and gripping the podium with both hands to stay vertical, and told her loud enough for every microphone in the room to pick up that she wasn't fit to shine my boots. The ballroom cracked open. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her frozen fingers and shattered on the marble floor. The sharp noise snapped every head in her direction. Elite donors began stepping away from my family's reserved table the way people back away from a gas leak. The whispers turned into open, disgusted conversation. My mom scrambled to recover, forcing out a trembling laugh, stammering that she had always been proud of my military service, that this was simply a misunderstanding. Her voice cracked on every word. It was the most pathetic performance of her career. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I stood with my shoulders squared, my posture the same as the day I pinned on my bars alone in that concrete auditorium with the empty chairs. I looked at her, the woman who called me slow at 7, who called me a stain at 16, who stole my combat pay and erased me from every guest list she ever printed, and I delivered one sentence in the same calm tone I used to end a tactical briefing. Enjoy the rest of your night. It's your last one. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. Behind me, the string ensemble had stopped playing. The only sound was my boots on marble and the low hum of 212 people realizing they had just witnessed the end of something that had been rotting for a very long time. At exactly midnight, the delayed email deployed to the press. The digital warhead I'd built in the garage finally hit its public target, providing the exact cover the feds needed to move in. By 8 a.m. these Monday, federal agents arrived at the charity's downtown offices with a sealed warrant and a fleet of unmarked sedans. They carried out boxes of hard drives, paper ledgers, and filing cabinets on hand trucks while office staff stood in the parking lot in shock, clutching coffee cups and whispering into their phones. By noon, the investigative journalist published the full exposure offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands ghost employees, drawing salaries for work that never happened. Fraudulent invoices from catering companies that existed only on paper, 6-figure donations diverted through 3 layers of shell corporations. Names, dollar amounts, account numbers. The story hit every local news outlet before the lunch hour ended. By close of business, Monday, the foundation's bank accounts were frozen by federal order. The empire my mom had spent 20 years building on stolen money and borrowed prestige collapsed in less than 12 hours. Every brick, every lie gone. I sat on the back porch of my dad's house, drinking black coffee from his old mug, watching the news alerts light up my phone one after another. Federal investigation opened. Accounts seized. Criminal referral issued. Donor lawsuits filed. I set the phone face down on the wooden armrest and stared at the tree line where the light was just breaking through. The operation had executed flawlessly. Every variable accounted for, every contingency mapped and neutralized. The fake charity was dead. My phone rang hard on Tuesday afternoon.
Victoria.
Her name on the caller ID looked smaller than it used to. I answered. The haughty, arrogant voice I had endured for 30 years was entirely gone, replaced by hyperventilating sobs. The State Bar Association had just suspended her law license, pending a criminal investigation into her fraudulent signatures on the foundation's wire transfer approvals. She was crying uncontrollably, begging me to call off the federal agents, screaming that she only signed what our mom forced her to sign, that she was just following orders that she was a victim to. She threw our mother under the bus in under 90 seconds. 30 years of absolute loyalty to the Golden Throne, and Victoria sold out her own queen to save her skin without pausing to take a breath between sentences. I listened to her sob. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a flat clinical awareness that this was always how it would end. The shield crumbling the moment the arrows actually landed. I told her that adults face consequences. Then I hung up. 3 days later, my mom called. Her social circle had vanished overnight. The donors were filing civil suits to recover their stolen money. Her personal attorney had dropped her case, citing conflict of interest, and the public defender's office was her only option. She was staring down a federal indictment for wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. She didn't scream this time, she wept. She pulled out the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, the victim card, and played it with the polished skill of a woman who had perfected emotional manipulation across 6 decades of practice. The trembling voice, the fragile calculated pauses between sentences, the shaking breath that sounded rehearsed because it was. She reminded me that she carried me for 9 months, that she endured labor pains to bring me into this world, that I owed her loyalty by blood by the sacred bond of motherhood, that a daughter doesn't burn down her own family. She even invoked God, asking me how I would answer to the Lord knowing I had destroyed my own mother. It was a masterwork of guilt. Every syllable designed to crack the wall to find the old wound to reach the 7-year-old girl crouching on the staircase who just wanted to be called downstairs. It was the exact same psychological script she had followed my entire life. The same guilt she weaponized to steal my hazard pay. The same manipulation she wielded to keep my dad quiet, compliant, and too afraid to speak up until the day he died alone in a hospital bed while she attended a charity brunch across town. But this time, the poison hit reinforced concrete. It didn't penetrate. It didn't sting. It didn't even register as language anymore. It was just noise. The sound of a con artist who had finally run out of marks. I spoke with a calm, measured cadence of a commander closing a final briefing. I told her I had paid for my childhood with blood money. I told her I had paid for my dad's peace with decades of silence. I told her the ledger was balanced, the debt was settled in full, and she was nothing to me anymore. Not a mother, not a manipulator, not even a memory worth keeping. I hung up the phone. I blocked her number. I blocked Victoria's number. I deleted both contacts. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood in the silence of my dad's house. Something immense and heavy lifted out of my chest. Not joy, not triumph, but a bone-deep exhaustion finally leaving my body after 30 years of permanent residence. The ghost of her control was dead. The line went quiet for good. The 6-month clause ended on a Wednesday. The estate lawyer transferred the deed of the house, the land, and all remaining accounts into my name. My mom couldn't contest it. She was too consumed fighting federal fraud charges to even think about hiring a civil attorney. I walked through the empty house alone. I opened every window in every room, letting the Virginia breeze push through hallways that had been sealed shut for years, flushing out the stale scent of expensive perfume and decades of carefully maintained lies. I went to the garage, swept the concrete floor clean, and set up my dad's tools on the oak workbench. I found a broken transistor radio on the back shelf behind the paint cans, the same model he taught me to repair when I was 7 years old. Sitting on his knee with his shaking hands guiding mine, I pulled up the stool, picked up a soldering iron, and went to work. The house was no longer a prison. For the first time in my life, the walls felt like they were mine. A month later, General Crawford reached out through official channels. He didn't just want to say thank you. He had used his considerable influence to establish a military-dependent scholarship fund for children of service members who had been abandoned or abused by their own families. He asked for my permission to name it after my dad. Robert Harrison, the quiet sick man who was treated like furniture by his own wife, who couldn't raise his voice, but raised his daughter with calloused hands, and a broken field watch would have his name permanently attached to honor, education, and integrity. I signed the authorization papers at my kitchen table. A single warm tear slid down my cheek and landed on the signature line. I didn't wipe it off. I let it dry right there on the page. The final chapter wrote itself without any effort from me. I read the updates in the local paper over the following months, each one smaller than the last. Because Margaret Harrison was becoming less and less newsworthy as the world forgot she existed. My mom lost everything. The house she had leveraged against the foundation was seized by the bank when the loan payment stopped. The antique furniture was auctioned off to pay legal fees. The elite friends, the politicians, the donors, the country club wives who used to fight for seats at her table disappeared the moment the indictment became public. Not one of them answered her calls. Not one of them showed up to her arraignment. She moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town with water-stained ceilings and a window that faced a dumpster. She kept her outdated designer bags lined up on a shelf she couldn't afford to dust. Too proud to sell them. Too broke to carry them anywhere worth going. Nobody called, nobody visited, nobody sent flowers or casseroles or sympathy cards. The thing she feared most in this world, absolute total irrelevance, had become her permanent mailing address. And the mail had stopped coming, too. Victoria took a position as a paralegal at a strip mall law office 40M outside the city, wedged between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The golden child was answering phones and filing paperwork for attorneys who had no idea she once signed 6F-figure wire transfers without reading the fine print. Her bar license was gone. Her inheritance was gone. Her corner office downtown had been rented to a dental practice. Her mother couldn't protect her because her mother couldn't even protect herself. They were both locked inside a prison of their own construction, built brick by brick over 30 years, and the doors had bolted shut from the inside. I packed my military duffel bag on a Sunday morning. I walked through each room one last time, running my hand along the door frames my dad had sanded and repainted himself 30 years ago when his hands were still steady. I stopped in the kitchen and washed my coffee mug, dried it, and placed it back in the cabinet. Then I stood at the front door of my dad's house. My house, wearing my tactical jacket, my combat boots laced tight. I looked down at the battered mechanical watch strapped to my wrist. The crystal was still scratched. The leather strap was still cracked and double-stitched with old fishing line, but the hand still moved. They had never stopped. I locked the front door, walked to my truck, tossed the duffel in the bed, and drove east toward base. The Virginia field stretched wide in the early light. I was returning to the shadows, not to hide, but to protect. Because true strength doesn't need an audience, and true honor doesn't need applause. There was always another mission waiting in the dark. Forgiveness isn't about letting toxic people back into your life. It's about cutting the heavy anchor so you can finally sail forward. If this story gave you the strength to stand up to the narcissists in your own family, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments how you claimed your own freedom. Stay strong and keep walking.